Are climate change predictions trustworthy, Steve?
Well, they are trustworthy if you take into account the full uncertainty involved. It's a very complicated system. We have limited observations. It's extraordinarily difficult to model. And so the predictions carry a lot of uncertainty about them.
So you've written the book Unsettled. Your basic thesis is that climate change is happening in a mild way, but that the alarmism, the sort of Greta Thunberg doomsdayism, is completely misplaced. Is that correct?
That's correct. When I hear people talking about existential threat, climate crisis, and invoking the science in order to justify that, I'm reminded of a line from the Princess Bride movie, where the main character says, "You keep using that word, the science. I don't think it means what you think it means." And in fact, none of these people have read the assessment reports, let alone the original literature.
Well, Steve, I'm enjoying reading your book enormously at the moment, and you begin it by talking about how as a child you were fascinated by science and how you carried around, in fact, you stole or nicked a thermometer from your classroom because you were so intrigued to go and measure the thermometer temperature in different places around your hometown, and it's a funny story. But we keep being told the planet is getting hotter. Is the planet getting hotter, Steve?
It is, in fact, getting warmer. It's gotten about 1 degree Celsius warmer since 1900. And that warming is thought to be in part due to human influences and in part due to natural phenomena.
And what does it mean? How dangerous is it?
Well, certainly the assessment reports say that a modest warming will actually be beneficial for the globe. And only when we get to 2 or 3 degrees do we start to see some impacts. And even those, the official reports say, will be modest.
Rita.
So where does this scaremongering come from, and what's the motivation behind it? Why do we have school children who are terrified, who think they and their families are going to die because of climate change, and soon? What's behind all that?
Well, I can't get into people's heads, but there's an American commentator called H.L. Mencken, and journalist who worked during the early 20th century. And he said that the purpose of practical politics is to keep the public alarmed by a series of hobgoblins, mostly imaginary, so that they would be clamoring to be led to safety. The truth is that, this climate change is not a hoax, but it's not horrible either. And I believe that we will be able to manage it largely by adaptation, because reducing our emissions on the scale required to make a difference is, I would say, practically impossible.
James.
Well, I'm glad to hear that you're a fan of H.L. Mencken. He's probably one of the guiding lights, I think, behind this show here. But I want to ask you then, where does all of this go? With the public, is there at some point where people start to get so tired of hearing the panic button hit over and over again about this that they start to turn off about all of these issues? I mean, just one piece of data that came out just a few hours ago, a report surveying millennials in Australia found that there is an increasing number of millennials who now say climate change isn't a big deal because they think that the media is scaring them about that. Are you seeing that in America or other places?
A little bit of that. I think where the rubber will really hit the road is when some of the drastic, large-scale measures that are being proposed start to impact ordinary people. And then they're going to stand back and say, is this really worth it? Is this really so much of a threat? And if they do, I hope they'll read the book, which I believe is a pretty straightforward, transparent, well-documented discussion of the science and what we might do about a changing climate.
Rita.
I'm also interested in this theory or this argument that the science is settled. Now, you're saying climate change is real, humans have got a contribution to make, but what is the argument against people who say the science is settled, this is a crisis, and if we don't make drastic changes, the world as we know is going to change? What would be your argument against people who put that forward?
Well, right now, the sensitivity of the climate to increased greenhouse gases is uncertain by about a factor of 3. And that means we can see a warming anywhere between 1.5 degrees and 4.5 degrees, depending upon which model you pick. And even if the warming got as much as 3 or 4 degrees, the reports themselves say that the economic impact will be equivalent to a couple years' worth of growth at the end of the century, 80 years from now. So even the official reports say this is not a big deal economically.
Now, Steve, you write
So
in your...
why are companies...
Sorry, Rita, you go.
So why are countries completely changing their economies, changing their energy security? They are signing up to zero net emissions, and there's a lot of pressure for Australia to sign up to zero net emissions. Why are they treating this like a crisis if it's not a crisis?
Well, it's because nobody ever reads the reports. And when you go from the basic research to the assessment reports, to the summaries of the reports, to the media, there's ample opportunity for mischief and misinformation. So what I've tried to do is to go right back to the original reports and the research literature, make them plain for non-experts, and really try to expose what the science really says.
Now, Steve, you write in your book that there are 3 things you always say to people, 3 facts that you find blows their minds, that people go, really? I didn't know that. And they're 3 very simple facts. Just explain those 3 facts to us.
Yeah, so in the U.S., where we have pretty good records of the temperature, across the 48 states, heat waves have not gone up. Heat waves are no more common now than they were in 1900, and the warmest temperatures haven't gone up in 60 years. Also, the official reports say we've not been able to detect any human influences on hurricanes from data that extend over most of a century. And if you look at global wildfires, they've gone down by 25% since 2003. And in 2020, when I know you had terrible fires in Australia and we had here in California, that was one of the least active fire seasons globally. A lot of that was due to the fact that people stopped burning forests for pasture. But nevertheless, it indicates that most of the fires are human-caused and are not climate-related.
James.
I want to come back to what you were talking about the models for climate change, and basically ask you this simple question. If the science is so settled, why do the models get more and more divergent with what they're predicting about what will be happening to the global temperature?
The modeling is an extraordinarily difficult task. It's one of the grandest computational challenges. You know, you cover the globe, the atmosphere, and the ocean with hundreds of millions of boxes, and you still have to make assumptions about what goes on inside of each of those boxes, which are currently about 100 kilometers on a side. Different people make different assumptions, you get different answers. And the community has just not converged as the models have become more sophisticated. They've become more divergent, and the community is really struggling to understand why.
Steve, just finally, before we're just about to run out of time, but let me just ask you, what do you hope will be the outcome of your book? Do you hope governments will actually start to pay attention to your thesis?
I hope people will read what I've written and check what I've written, because there are ample references to the official documents. They'll be surprised and they'll ask, how come I didn't know that? And what else am I not being told about the climate? And I hope that that will lead to some very interesting and hopefully productive conversations.
Steve Koonin, thanks so much. The book Unsettled is out now. I urge people to read it. I'm enjoying it at the moment. It's a terrific read. Thanks so much, Steve, for coming on Outsiders.
Pleasure to be talking with you.